pushing through the market square.
David Bowie is regarded as one of the most famous rock stars of the 1970s. He has sold close to 40 million albums and worked with other musical innovators, including Lou Reed, Freddie Mercury, John Lennon, Iggy Pop, and Brian Eno. Alone, his career was already an outstanding accomplishment, and remarkable to anything David Jones could have dreamed of. However, nonconformists of following generations owe him more than what his life as a rock star has done for them. As an advocate for acceptance and self-expression, young David Bowie in the 1960s challenged society's rigid view of traditional gender roles. Bowie embraced the responsibility to be an instigator who inspired a pivot in how we perceive and accept nonconforming perspectives and an affirmation surrounding different identities. His impact on art, society, and the right to self-expression continues to reverberate today. David Bowie was born David Robert Jones in Brixton, London on January 8, 1949. From a young age, David Jones was influenced by people in his life who taught him the musical and moral fundamentals which led his career. His first and most primal influence was his half-brother, Terry Burns. Later in his life, Terry Burns was diagnosed with schizophrenia, which eventually admitted him to a mental hospital. Burns' mental state reflected abnormal and nonconformist ideas, and he served as an older, wiser mentor in David Bowie's formative years. Terry Burns educated him on subjects that would regularly not be formally taught, visions such as jazz, science fiction, and Buddhism. In an article from Far Out magazine, Bowie remembers, "Burns gave me the greatest serviceable education that I could have had. He just introduced me to the outside things. I saw the magic and I caught the enthusiasm for it because of his enthusiasm for it. And I kind of wanted to be like him." David's career is littered with references to Terry Burns. Due to Burns' schizophrenia, David became obsessed with insanity in his artistry. He would write songs such as All the Mad Men, Jump They Say, and the Bewlay Brothers. Aladdin Sane, one of his many personas, is alleged to be Terry Burns reimagined. As a teenager, Little Richard's music inspired David Jones to learn the saxophone, his first instrument. He recalls, "I realized Little Richard had so many saxophones in his band, so I went out and bought a saxophone, intending that when I grew up I'd work in the Little Richard band as one of his saxophonists. Anyway, it didn't work out like that, but without him, I think myself and half my contemporaries wouldn't be playing music." 5 years before his first break in music with the release of Space Oddity in 1969, David Jones founded the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men, after judgment, unfair treatment, and rejection from schools, pubs, and other public places due to the length of his hair.
Well, here we are. Long-haired men, you've got to have your hair, 9 inches long before you can join?
Well, I think we're past that over now.
Have you?
Yes.
Now, exactly who's being cruel to you?
Well, I think we're all fairly tolerant, but for the last 2 years we've had comments like "darling" and "can I carry a handbag" thrown at us. I think it's just had to stop now.
But does this surprise you that you get this kind of comment? Because after all, you've got really rather long hair, haven't you?
We have, yes. Yeah, it's not too bad, really. No, I like it, and I think we all like long hair. And we don't see why other people should persecute us because of this.
Simultaneously, in New York City, the burgeoning gay rights movement was met with prejudice and violence. Sit-ins were used by gay protesters during the 1960s, when it was legal for a bar to refuse service to its patrons due to their homosexuality. Sit-ins entailed going to a bar, announcing that you were gay, and then ordering a drink. Next, watching whether you would be either served or escorted out, arrested, or worse. Dick Leitch, Craig Rodwell, and John Timmons were activists who were tired of mistreatment from public services. On April 21, 1969, the men hosted sit-ins across a number of bars in New York City. Their intention was to be denied service so that they could make the argument about inequality being pursued against queer people. Several of the establishments on their itinerary had a sign posted outside, which read, "If you are gay, please go away." At a bar called Julius's Bar, Leitch told the bartender that they were gay. The bartender covered their glasses with his hand and refused to serve them. This action was captured by photographer Fred McDarrah from the Village Voice, making for a powerful image. This was critical for the gay rights movement because it was the first time such issues were being televised and broadcasted across media. This event proved how queer people were targeted by prejudice in public spaces and not given the freedom to coexist with the rest of society. However, the Stonewall riots of 1969 proved that people, specifically police, were willing to use violence in order to silence and attempt to erase queer people. The 1960s were not a safe time to be queer. The Stonewall Inn was a gay bar located in Greenwich Village. On the evening of June 28, 1969, there was a police raid inside the bar. Officers brutally interrogated patrons and roughly hauled people out. Instead of quietly surrendering in the backs of police cars, the people fought back. Marsha P. Johnson, a drag queen in attendance, is alleged to have thrown the first brick. Meanwhile, in 1970, David Bowie posed for The Man Who Sold the World album cover, wearing a dress and chest-length hair. With the release of Space Oddity, David Bowie began getting praise for his work in otherworldliness instead of being persecuted. Other victims of persecution could identify with David Bowie and his music. On July 6, 1972, a mainstream British television program aired David's performance of Starman. The song was the fourth on the A-side of David Bowie's The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, released in the same year. He wore a scaly rainbow jumpsuit and showed his mangled teeth each time he opened his mouth to sing. Despite his outrageous outfit, the most controversial part of his performance was when, halfway through the song, he wrapped his arm around his guitarist Mick Ronson, sharing a microphone with very little space between the two. This iconic moment was mind-blowing. It was unseen for a rock star with such a platform to act so boldly. In order to understand the importance of this event, we must understand that the smallest affections toward the same sex were immediately suspicious and often misjudged. As seen in the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Long-Haired Men, collar-length hair on men 50 years ago is today's equivalent to waist-length hair. What caused that shift in standards surrounding gender? Why are our standards so different compared to the 1970s and 60s? What role did David Bowie play, and why is he important in how we perceive and accept people today? The daring action received both criticism and respect. On one hand, people couldn't understand how someone could act in such a way and resented Bowie for it. These people were used to older, conservative ideas and often were older. Others admired him for it because they viewed it as an act of rebelling against outdated, strict ideology created by members of older generations, parents, teachers, employers, and others. They were excited to see someone lead new ways of thinking. The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars is considered Bowie's most celebrated record due to the otherworldly and revolutionary lyrics, performances, and sound. Ziggy Stardust is David Bowie's iconic image, an alien from Mars. For people who didn't identify with an audience, for people who felt constantly isolated and alienated, Ziggy Stardust was their symbol. Ziggy was an alien to the world, and these people were made aliens to society. David Bowie's music has continued to be embraced by both conformists and nonconformists of old and new generations. His music also affects and influences other musicians, listeners, and creatives. David Bowie's influences evolved his art into what we know today. His art has caused a chain reaction of inspiration among artists. David Bowie creates art which reflects the likes of mentors who inspired him, and other people later let his art inspire them. Artists including but not limited to Madonna, Lady Gaga, The Smiths are all examples of David Bowie's work being a reference for other creatives. Bowie's impact on values surrounding conformity, gender, and fashion has continued to reverberate today. David Bowie's works were so admired because they reflected the future of conformity. They were shocking and revolutionary for people of his time. The brutal 1960s and 70s were reinventing themselves, and it was inspiring to see them being led by artists like David Bowie. This is why David Bowie is critical in considering the shift in standards and conformity from 50 years ago compared to now. Since the 70s, David Bowie has been the basis of how we accept others. He preaches that instead of being alienated, embrace the alien.